a quilting tale today. My name is Shaylin and today's video is all about organizing fabric. I have lots of new fabric that's ready to be added to my stash. I've finished several projects recently and I have all kinds of scraps that need to be processed, so I'll show you what I do with my scraps. And it's just time to declutter and get rid of fabric and other things that I don't need anymore, whether it's because I just don't use them or my skills have changed. I'm going to talk a little bit about that process and what I've been getting rid of as well. So I thought I would break this down into three main pieces. The first is going to be how I organize new fabric, what I do with it when I get it, how much I get when it's not designated for a project. I'll also talk about what I do with my scraps when they start to pile up, and I'll also talk about projects that have all the fabric I need for them, whether it's a project that I've started and I have to put away because I'm working on something else or I just don't have time for it, or projects that I've purchased the fabric for already. I haven't started, but I want to keep it all together. So I'll show you what I do with project fabrics as well. So let's go ahead and talk first about some things that I've just been trying to clear up to use less of. Bear in mind, I don't have a designated sewing room. I have a portion of a wall where I have my sewing table, and then this is our guest room slash craft room slash design board. So I do some projects in here. It's a little quieter sometimes, but it has to be tidied up to be used for other things. So far I've gone through my stash and pulled fabrics that I just don't see myself using. A lot of these are flannels. I did get rid of several patterns as well that I just felt like my skill set had surpassed, or they no longer interest me anymore. So, I had torn out several patterns from magazines and went back through those because I just had a huge pile of them, and I just thought, am I realistically going to make this? Or I have another one that looks sort of like this that I like better. So as I'm getting more and more patterns, I'm being more picky about which ones I keep. Like, do I really want to make this quilt now? Rather than, oh, it was a free pattern and I might make it someday or it might come in handy. Another thing I did was I've been buying more digital patterns, and so rather than print them all out, because who knows when I'll get around to making them, I've just been printing the front page and then writing on the top of the cover page where I can see what the quilt looks like, where I stored that pattern. So for me it's a thumb drive, and I say the file name or the folder that it's in, so that way I know right where to find it. So that's another way I've kind of reduced the clutter or just amount of stuff I have. Over here I have my fabric scraps that need to be just processed. These are from old projects. Some of them are trimmed off backings after having quilts done and just leftovers from projects. So I need to cut those down and get them in my tub so they're organized. And then I have some fabric that I just purchased and I need to get it added to my stash. So I thought I'd show you how I organize my stash as well. So let's start with that one. I keep these tubs on some shelves in my garage, and so I save purchased fabric till it feels worth bringing in all the tubs. But you can see I have my corals and oranges and yellows, pinks, greens and purples are combined because I just don't have as much of those. Reds, backing fabrics for larger pieces, multicolored or stripes, and then I have whites and low volume whites. Creams or off-whites, and then the low volume. I put my black and gray and tans and browns together, and I realized I have the most in blue. So I have blues and navies and aquas and blues. Typically, if I'm buying fabric that I like and I don't know which project it's going to be used in, I just want to add it to my stash, I usually just get a half yard of it. If it's a stripe and I think it could be good for binding, then I tend to go with a full yard or 3/4 of a yard at least. But the others, I usually just pick up a half a yard, unless it's something on sale and you have to get a minimum of a yard. But these buckets contain pieces that are 1/3 of a yard up to a yard typically. There might be a couple 2-yard pieces, but most of them are under a yard each. If it's backing, I won't have as much in the tub, as many pieces in the tub, but I can usually get 4 or 5 backings in these tubs. And I'll show you a picture of these tubs with their dimensions. I got these at Costco when they were on sale, fortunately, but they don't have to be these ones. Anything that's a fat quarter or scrap pieces, I'll show you what I do with those, but I don't keep scraps in these tubs. These are full pieces of fabric that I can use for projects later. So let me show you first, when I get new fabric, I just sort them on top of the lids first. So I just keep them closed, and I'll just stack the new fabric on top just so I know what tubs they need to go into. Alright, so I've got my fabrics sorted and they're ready to go into the tub. So I'll show you how I fold them now. And a lot of them are already folded in a nice way that'll make them just pop right in. So I'll do maybe this piece here that's not quite ready to put in the tub. So this is a half yard piece, which is what the majority of my pieces are. And it's already folded selvage to selvage. And so what I do next is just fold it in half again, along the same width. So I'll fold it like this. And oftentimes, I should say, I'll turn it this way because I like the label to show if there is one. So I'll fold it in half like that, and then in half one more time, and then I'll fold it one more time the opposite way. And again, I want to keep the label showing. So now it looks like this. So I'll do that one more time with another piece. So again, it's already folded selvage to selvage. And then I'm going to keep that label showing on the selvage. So I'm going to just fold it, the closed edge to the open selvage edges. And then I'm going to fold it one more time. And then the final fold is in half. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that all of mine are folded this way. If they're a different yardage, not a half yards fold up nicely like this. If they're a different one, usually I can get something very close, but I'm trying to get it to this size because it's what fits my bucket. If it's something like this is a panel. So it looks very close to a half yard. I think it's a little bigger, but it should work in a similar way. Pardon me for reaching in front of the camera. Now if I fold it in half this way, it's going to be too long. So what I would do, it's the width that I like, but what I would do is just fold in one side and fold in another side, just so it's approximately the same size. So you just kind of fudge it. Sometimes it doesn't always fold perfectly and you just have to do some overlapping. Here's a look inside. This is my aqua and blues tub. One thing that I do is put seasonal fabric, like Christmas fabrics or Halloween, or just any 4th of July, in the very back. And then I might, this one is a Christmas one, otherwise it would be with my navy. but I have, some patriotic. And then I started to try to make them kind of go from dark to light, but I thought really as long as I can see them all, some of them I group more by if it's the same line or just like all my kind of under the sea type fabrics I put together there. So I think, there's not a lot in each tub where it would be hard to find them. So I just want to make them all visible when I stand them up in here. So I think I'm going to just pop this new floral in, maybe by this floral here. And again, I can see the label if I need to, but I just kind of scrunch it down there and then tidy it up. So because I have the most kind of blues out of all my fabrics, I have more than one tub of those. And so if it starts to get too tight and I can't fit the fabric in or flip through them, then it is time for a new tub, or to start using my stash would probably be the better answer, which is a plan for this year, is to start using some of this up, but collecting it sure is fun. One other thing I keep in mind when I decide which tub to put the fabric in is I always go by the background. So if it's something that's multicolored, like this one is very multicolored, I always base it on the background, which is that aqua color. So it could be something very colorful, and it might be hard to think that it's goes in that tub. Like this one, for example, I have it in my white pile, but it is very colorful. So I would not put this in my low volume whites. Those are the ones that just barely show up on the white, or they're just softer. So this one will go in my white tub because the background is white. I wanted to show you my striped tub as well. I wrote on the front, it's stripes and multicolored. A lot of times stripes, there isn't a clear, white or coral. They're about the same amount. But because I like to use them for bindings, I keep them together. I also keep my panels in here because even though they might have a solid background color, I just want to remember that there are panels in one place. And then multicolors could also be something like this, where the background changes. And so I put those in there as well. So the ones that don't have a clear background color go in here. I also put the remnants of my bindings in the very back in case I do a small wall hanging or placemat or something that doesn't need much binding. These are left over from past quilts. So that's my striped tub. Couple other considerations. Sometimes I'll come across a fabric like this one where it's kind of hard to place it, because it's an orange red. So do I put it with red or do I put it with orange? Here's one that I know is a true red, and this one reads more orange red to me. So if that's the case, sometimes I just put it, whichever one has more room in it. Or if I made a decision before, like I've been kind of putting these in with my oranges, then I will just continue that just so I know where the orange reds are. So sometimes you just have to make that call when they're in between. And then if you have fabric from a same line, some people might want to keep that line together. Here's an example of one. But what I sometimes do is just take a picture, and then I know when I pull one of these, I can look at my pictures and say, oh yeah, there were 4 other prints that went with that, even if they're not all the same background color. So I'm pretty good at remembering if there's multiple pieces from the same line, and I would look back at that. So that's how I would handle the same line if you are hesitant to break it up. Or you might decide to group your fabrics by line or by motifs, or there's not just one way, but color works well for me. Here's a bigger assortment that I'm going to split up, and so I'll take a picture of it so I can see all the fabric in it. And again, I just want to see on the edge what the line is called. So that's juniper. So again, I'll just have this in a file folder where I can see collections that I have. if I'm having a hard time figuring out, is this white or is it cream? First of all, if you can hold it up to a window with natural lighting, that helps. Or I can use my light, has a bright natural light setting I can hold it under. But another quick thing I do is take a fabric I know for sure is white and hold it next to it. And if it looks kind of dingy in comparison, I usually think, okay, that one is an off-white or a cream. So that's another way you can quickly tell. Some fabrics I have to stare at a very long time to see what color this is. I have this in some natural light and I'm thinking, is this black? Is it navy? I think it's actually a very dark green. And what helped me was to look at the selvage. They often put a color swatch of all the colors that are in that print. When I looked at those carefully, it came across as green to me. So put it in some natural light. And again, I had ordered this online, so I wasn't sure what it was. And so when I got it, I think it is a dark green if I look at it in just the right light. Let's take a look at low volume. I'll show you what I mean by low volume. And this is how I organize my fabric. So for sure, if it's like a white on white where you hardly can see the pattern unless it's close up, I count those as low volume. I also use ones, even if you can see, I think from a distance, will you be able to see what it is, or will it still read mostly white? Oftentimes it has a lot of white space in it. So like this one has these tiny little bunnies on it. When I pull away, it looks pretty white, and that's because there's so much extra white space. So there can be color in low volume, like these ones. Again, there's just a lot of white space there. This one has green in it, but again, it's very soft. It's not very dominant or thick pieces of coloring, so I consider these all my low volumes. This one has a lot of drawing all over it, but it's very thin, and from a distance it looks white. And then I have some that are kind of pushing the limit to me, again, because there's lots of white, but red is such a high contrast color, so I do have a few of those in, again, just because of the amount of white space in them. I think you can still see it as a white background, but I think these are starting to get more in the category of blenders, where they have these small little prints on them. They're still mostly white, and they just kind of complement stronger prints. Whereas these ones, these are busy, so there is white on them, but these are like my little otters here. And even though it's thinner drawing lines, the color is so packed in that I think, or there's such high contrast close by, that I think these are more, oh, that one should actually be with my stripes. I think that these are just going in my regular white tub, white backgrounds, but they have clear prints to them. This one was another one that's kind of on the edge to me, maybe a low volume because it's soft blue in there. You know, same thing with this one. There's more white space. The navy really was jumping out at me. So, you know, some of them are harder to tell than others, or could go either way. But I think, you know, just pick what makes sense for your organization or what you have room for, and, you know, just try and stick with it. Like some of these are really busy with white backgrounds, definitely not low volume, but that's kind of my rule of thumb when I look at it is, you know, it's mostly white you're seeing, and it's not going to detract too much being next to other blocks. It's kind of a supporting fabric. So when I think of blenders, I think of things like polka dots and gingham. They might have bolder colors, but they can really blend in with most motifs, and so they're another good supporting fabric. This could go with a nautical print, it could go with florals. So my definition of blender when I'm thinking of those is that they can blend in well with just about anything. It's really the color that's important. So low volumes would be the softest ones. Blenders would be the next one that I'd start considering in my tub. I'd go from low volumes to maybe blenders, because both will support more bold, distinct prints or motifs. Here's an example of some of my darker navy blenders. So I have the polka dot, the thatched, the little rings, grunge, solids, and then this one will go in a different tub, but the gingham. So again, these could support all different types of motifs and designs, giving a pop of color but not detracting from the main design. And some people might put solids in their own category. I don't have a lot of just plain solid prints, so I'm gonna put them with my blenders as well. So here's my navy blue tub all sorted now. I've got my blenders in the back, including some solids, and then it moves into florals, and then these are kind of my ocean themed fabrics, and I get into kind of some 30s retro that have brighter colors, and end up with some lighter, mostly florals in the front. So it's just kind of getting into the lighter blues, which will take me to my next tub, which has more blues and aquas. So ultimately with my stash, I just want to know that I can pull out large, full pieces that aren't going to be cut up, and I don't have as much as I thought I may have. So I just want to make sure that what I'm putting in the stash totes are full pieces. And again, that's about 1/3 of a yard and up. Now, scraps have their own totes too, and so that's what I'll share next, is what I do with my smaller pieces. Now, scraps can come from all kinds of places. They can be leftover pre-cuts that didn't get used in a project, like these charm squares. Some of them were trimmed off of the backing of a quilt after getting it long-armed. Some of them are yardage that matches a fabric line. These are the scraps left over from the Hallelujah quilt that I made. This one are all the remnants from a fabric line called Bloomington, where I made a mystery block of the month. I've also purchased a couple of these Moda scrap bags that have pieces in them. One out, for example. Pieces in them that might be a little bigger than a jelly roll, and so these pieces just need to be cut down to size as well. I have pieces that came from my stash. This is part of what I had pulled for my Moda Blockheads 4 quilt, where I was using bright crayon colors, and so those came from my stash, and so I want to make sure I trim those down before I either return them to my stash if the pieces are still big, or they'll become cut down to my scrap size. And then I've also gone to some porch sales that some of the local quilting guilds have had and bought just bags of scrap fabric. And so I'd actually gone to one where you could fill a big grocery bag for $10, and I used a lot of it for a project I'm going to do with my students, but I did hold on to some that I really liked and thought could tie into some quilts or color schemes that I like, and so I need to cut those down as well. So scraps are easy to accumulate and can easily become overwhelming, so I want to take some time to organize them so that they're more easily accessible and usable. It's time to turn this bag of scraps into something more organized. So I have these, they're kind of short but wide tubs here that I got at Michael's, and you can see I have 1.5 inch strips, 2.5, 3.5, and then up here I have 5 inch strips, 7 inch, fat quarters, and layer cake squares. So any extra layer cake squares go there. If I can take one of my, half yard cuts that I've cut off of and get a fat quarter out of it, you just have to cut it in half between the selvage edges. That gets you a fat quarter. And then some of these are nice pre-cut sizes, like 5 inch strips. If I have charm squares, I'll put them in there. If I have strips of 5 inches, I can make charm squares if I'm doing a charm pack pattern. Same thing with the 2.5 inch jelly roll strips can go in there, or I can make my own. So I'm going to work on cutting them down, and what I tend to do is try to make the biggest pieces I can. So if I can get a fat quarter out of it, I want to preserve it as best I can, and then move to 7 inch. Now you can see my 7 inch tub is already pretty full, and the reason I like to keep 7 inches, you can still cut those down further if you need to, or if you need a larger piece, they're there. So if it gets too full, I might just lean on cutting more 5 inch and so on. But when my bins are getting full, like some of them are, it tells me I need to make a scrap quilt very soon. So these 1.5 inch strips are good for string quilts, but there are lots of patterns that ask for jelly rolls, and so there's a lot of really usable cuts here, and it helps keep them organized. You're also going to want a trash bag handy. I don't keep little crumb pieces. At some point you have to decide how small you want to keep your pieces. You don't want your possessions to possess you, as I've heard, and become overwhelming and hard to deal with. So you'll also want a large mat to cut with, a rotary cutter with a sharp blade, this ruler, the long 24 inch ruler. This is 6 by 24, works really well for cutting pieces, and then maybe a smaller one when you have smaller scraps to deal with. A stripology ruler could also be helpful if you're planning on cutting a bunch the same size from the same cut. I'm also grabbing a pair of fabric scissors because I keep a record of all the quilts I've made, and so I'll want to cut a few little swatches to glue in my book. So I'll keep those in a bag too as I cut those out. One more thing I grabbed was my little iron and wool mat, or just your ironing board, in case you get any pieces like this that are just so wrinkled and crumpled from being stuffed in a box or something that you can't get a good cut out of it. So I have that ready for those such pieces. So I'm going to just start on the floor here because it's just a little quieter in this room and easier to film. I'll probably move to a table so it's not so hard on my knees and back over time. This is also a good time to just put on a show or some music and just get in the groove of cutting down your scraps. So I'm going to go ahead and start processing my scraps, and I just kind of toss them on top of the tub when I'm done cutting it, and then at the end I'll straighten the tubs up a bit more. Alright, to process my bag of scraps, first of all, before I put away all my tubs of fabric that have larger pieces, I want to look for the pieces like this that have quite a bit left, but then there's some that's cut off here, and so I still would have quite a bit left, but I just want to cut off that extra part. So I don't iron anything unless it's, crinkled so badly it's not going to sit flat or anything in my scrap tubs. But what I'll do here is just look for where I can cut you know, where I've started to cut here, and I'll just cut off this excess, and that piece I'll cut up into smaller scrap pieces, but then the remaining piece will get folded up and put into my totes. And you'll want to probably switch out your blade and get a nice sharp blade if you're going to be doing a lot of scrap processing. Okay, so this piece I'll just put back in the bag to cut down to better sizes to deal with. And now this one is just a whole piece. And so I'll treat it the same way, selvage to selvage. And then this one is bigger than ½ yard, so I'll just do some overlapping. And I'll add that to my stash tub. If I look at this one, it's a little over 6 inches, so I'll cut 7 inches from it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that will give me just a little left that's not worth saving. If I had, you know, another 3 inches left, I'd cut that down to 2.5 inches and so on. So on this one, I'm going to just cut the selvage edge off. And then I can probably get a 7-inch piece and more. Now you can see the light side here. This is a crooked cut, so I might not be able to go all the way to this edge, but let me show you what I'd do in this case. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 inches will be at 18. And again, I've lined up this edge along a line on my ruler. This one's going to go in my 7s pile, and then I have this piece left, and so I'm going to just use my ruler on this one. I can see if I line it up at 2.5, I can get a full strip and there's some left over on the top there. So this is going to be a 2.5 inch strip. And then at this point, I'd have to see, is there enough to be 1.5? No, not really. So this is just going to go in the garbage. Sometimes I do watch if I have selvage edges left. I look for any cute little sayings or ones that might make a nice trim to a quilt label in the future. Like this one says, "Every moment is a fresh beginning." So if I liked that one, I would just turn this and just cut it, you know, about a little over 1/4 inch, so you get a piece of the fabric showing too, because oftentimes I'll coordinate it to the backing. So maybe more like 1/2 inch from the start of the selvage, and then just cut that. And then I'll save this piece with all my other sayings, and I might trim it down. I don't need the whole length of it, but just so I have a little bit before and after the saying. This piece is almost a perfect fat quarter as is. It's just barely over 18 inches, which a fat quarter is 18 by 22. And it goes to 24 inches. So I could cut a couple inches off the side here, clean up the side a bit, or just leave it as is as an oversized fat quarter. But it is possible when you are working with stash fabric that you've cut off of to end up with a fat quarter. This piece here was from my stash. It was a 1/2 yard, 18 inches, and as you can see, it goes past the 22 inch mark, so I can cut a fat quarter out of this and then cut down the remaining. So the fold line where it was originally folded in half is a good indicator of where to cut it in half, and you see that it lands on 22 here. When I line the selvage up, I have it going overlapping the 0, so I think that's enough fabric there to get a good fat quarter out of. I'm just gonna do a clean cut, and fat quarters I'm not as concerned if they're not exactly 18 by 22, because I'm not going to use a fat quarter size piece in a block. It is going to get cut down, so I just want to make sure that I have at least that dimension in there. So I'm just placing this on the fold line. So here's my fat quarter. And then with the rest of it, I'll just cut down. I'm gonna give this a little press here because it's sticking up, and I want to make sure I get a good cut there, not with ripples in it. So first thing I'll do, since there's a little piece missing up here, is I'll cut that down, just align it here. Cut. And then now I have a clean line here. I can see maybe I can get 3.5 out of this one. I use a lot of decorative boxes that you can get at a craft store like Michael's or Joann's or Hobby Lobby, and I keep projects that I haven't started yet in them, all the materials for them. This one, for example, I have my backing fabric, the pattern. I had to break up the fat quarter bundle a little bit just so I could get the box to close. I have my border fabric in there, and so I like to keep it all together. If I know there's a pattern I want to do and a line that I like that's come out, I like to get it all at once, because, you know, if it takes me a couple years to get to the pattern, that fabric line might be gone or parts of it hard to get, especially the backing. So if I know what I want to make and what line I want to use, I like to get it all at once. But I have learned over the years that a lot of designers will release new fabric lines that have similar colors, so don't stress if you can't get it all at once. I got a couple bins like this that were on clearance at Joann's, I believe. They were about $14, and they have these organizers in them. There's more where you could add horizontal bars here, but for projects where I pull from my stash, I like to use these just to keep all that fabric together. So these are the prints I'm using for my Extravaganza quilt. So lots of pinks, reds, aquas, yellows, and some of that bright green as well. So I keep those there, and it just lets me see what I have real quick at a glance. And once I'm done with that project, these will get cut down and be added to my scrap bins, or some of them, you know, there might be enough. I might need to just trim off the used edges to get a nice clean edge to return it to my stash totes. Inside of my sewing table there are some shelves, and so the top shelf I keep my layer cakes, and then I have other pre-cuts like charm packs and some jelly rolls that don't have a designated project yet. I found this basket. It was the perfect size for those 5-inch charm packs, and I have a couple of the mini charms in the very front. So I've kind of sorted these by motif here. I have a lot of florals in the front, and so that's charm packs. And then in the very bottom, in these bags, I have stored my physical patterns, and I've sorted them by pre-cuts. A lot of them are pre-cut friendly patterns, and then I have the ones that are just cut from yardage in the back. So they're just sorted by what kind of pre-cuts the pattern says it'll take or use. And then the smaller bag has smaller projects like stuffed animals or tote bags or little pouches. So it's just easy to find my patterns by organizing them this way. And so they just get tucked on the bottom shelf here along with the user manual for my sewing machine when I need to reference it. And then the rest of what's in here are just bags that have project fabric in it, fabric that I want to keep together. Same thing with this shelf on the left-hand side. There's some boxes and project bags with the fabric that goes together. And then all of my books. So you can see I'm going to miss Martingale, the publishing company, but got a lot of books from them. As for the rest of my fabric, I keep it in these large black totes. My husband built these racks on the ceiling of our garage to free up some space. And so I just label these totes fabric 1, fabric 2, and then what fabric is in them. So it might be fabric that I'm setting aside for a project, or just projects I don't plan on getting to soon. And so I just keep them in there and have a notebook that tells me what's in each of those totes. I know there are many different ways that we can organize our fabric, so really it's about finding what works for you. Hopefully something that I've shown has inspired you or given you an idea of what you might do with yours. What's important is that we can access our fabric and know where it is and just be inspired by it when we see it, not overwhelmed by it. And so that's my goal when I'm organizing my fabric. In all honesty, I spent several hours cutting down my scraps, and I felt like I hardly made a dent in them, but it's something that I'm not gonna give up on. I went through the big pieces and cut those down. So I have a smaller tub now where I can use my portable cutting mat and just cut down a few scraps here and there. Working on it all day, my knees were hurting. I moved to the dining room table and my feet and my back were starting to hurt, and so it's just not something that I'd recommend trying to take care of in a whole day, or in my case, a 3-day weekend with the temperatures in the teens. I thought that would be a perfect time to work on organizing, and I did get a lot done, but it was too ambitious to try and get through all my scraps. So I am going to keep working on them, and I have a lot of them processed, but still many more to go, and so I think just working on it bit by bit, a little at a time, is going to be the way to go. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like and subscribe, I appreciate it. It helps support my channel. And next time I see you, I'm going to reveal which of the 3 quilts I've selected to work on, and I will have started on it, so I'll give you some tips about my process with that quilt. So I hope you're looking forward to that. I'll see you next time.